the Minister for Planning, the Hon Brad Hazzard, who's come up here to run the forum. Neighbouring MP Thomas George, the Deputy Speaker and Member for Lismore. I think we just need to get straight into it so that we can have an exchange of views.
Can I just, first of all, thank all of you for coming to this opportunity for a bit of a two-way yarn about what the issues are. I had a request from Thomas George on behalf of all the other MPs, and when you get a request from Thomas George, you don't ever dare say no. He emphasised that there was concern up here about just the whole, well, the CSG issue, but also generally the planning issues beyond CSG. Now look, what we're doing in the planning space, we've made some huge changes. We've only been there in government for a year, and we came off the back of 16 years of the former government. And can I add too, that since I just had someone you'll get on with it, can I have someone just say, can you understand this? There's no question in my mind or the government's mind. If you think that coal seam gas or any other resource, whether it's gas of any type, if we can manage to find it, which we don't happen to have in New South Wales, or any of the other resources that we have are absolutely locked up and never going to be used, then I think that's actually not a position the government could support. And I'll explain why in a minute. We had, I think I've been at 2 public meetings in the last couple of weeks, big public meetings. One was at Singleton and one was at Gunnedah, which are the areas that we've mapped. I'm going to explain it to you in a sec. Now, where we're at is this. Perhaps I'll just explain the system that operated up until the time we came to government, which created, I think, the sense of frustration for me and doubtless for many of you. And I think most of your frustration in certain areas, as was mine, as was my colleagues, came from things that happened over the last 16 years. And we have been feverishly trying to address some of those concerns. Exploration licences were handed out like confetti. And then some of these companies, I think understandably, particularly when they paid substantial amounts of money. I know one company that paid, in a case of a major mining opportunity, $300 million to the former Labor state government. If you pay that amount of money, and then you spend millions more exploring over a number of years, there seemed to be an assumption, and it would be dealt with an expectation, a given. You've paid out millions of dollars, you're going to get your approval. Keep in mind the exploration licence was issued by one minister, the Energy and Resources or Mining Minister, and then it would come maybe a year, 2, 3 later, it would come to the Planning Minister, all done behind closed doors too, I might add. So we looked at all that, and it's taken us a lot of work in the last 8.5 months out of the 12 months. We knew intuitively, but not scientifically, that there were areas that logically should be protected. And what we did was we brought together a number of community groups, but also a half a dozen different government agencies. So we brought together people like the Office of Environment and Heritage, Department of Private Industries, Premier and Cabinet, a whole lot of them anyway. And those people have been working flat out, and a couple of them are here with us, representing, although they weren't direct, one of them was assisting but not directly involved, but all of them have been working flat out on trying to come up with a model that would provide protection. And the areas that kept getting emphasised to us were areas like, for example, which is why I was up in Gunnedah a couple of weeks ago, the area around, for example, the Liverpool Plains, the black soil plains, areas back down in the Hunter, like the viticulture industry, like the thoroughbred industry. And so what we said was, how do we had one option, which was simply to go out and draw a line on a map and say, this area, don't do anything here, safe, boom, gone. If I do that today, and I'm no longer the minister, tomorrow or 6 months' time, another minister could come along, particularly if there's a change of government, and it would just revert to what's happened for the last 16 years.
No, we'll deal with it.
We've put a suggestion that between the stage of the exploration licence, that thing that was handed out like confetti previously, well, first of all, we've issued our own government. It isn't, by the way, a fait accompli. It's what we think is the best, but we're not saying it is the best. It is what we've managed to come up with. We've issued not one exploration licence since we came to government, so it's been, what, 12 months, nearly 13 months, and not one new exploration licence.
However, I think there's been 1 or 2 mining licences, not coal seam gas.
I vaguely recollect, Kyler, is it? I vaguely recollect there was something about one somewhere around the Heathcote area that might have had an exploration extension by one bore. But that's all I can think of that's been done in the 12 or 13 months. And we developed what's called now the aquifer interference regulation, so that even those ones that are well down the track are having to comply now with looking at the aquifer issues and going through a very scrutinised process. We can't get this new policy up without going through all the community consultation, without actually making sure that what we're doing is right, but there are some things that we knew that we could do. And one of the big issues for us was protecting aquifers, making sure that there's no damage. Damage to aquifers is one of the biggest risks of any sort of mining, really. Now, the second thing we did, in addition to doing that and developing, or third thing I should say, in addition to developing this draft policy, in addition to developing those 2 things, the aquifer interference and the agricultural impact statement, we started the mapping. I just assumed that there would be maps. They're trying to find out what assets there are for the taxpayers. As we now have this phase, which is the consultation phase where we're listening, they are saying to us they don't believe our current mapping has actually identified sufficiently the areas, particularly up around Narrabri, towards Moree. The other day I was in Singleton, and some of the folks there, the farmers, were saying, well, you haven't really identified some of the areas around Merriwall. So we're now putting out for public discussion. There's actually had a lot of things fall out along the way that I think have been very positive. They've allowed us and the various government agencies to realise they now have a government that's actually very serious about trying to strike the right balance, trying to make sure that we protect our agricultural, our prime or strategic agricultural lands, trying to protect our aquifers and our groundwater, but at the same time making sure that if there are assets that sit below the ground that aren't going to damage, and I stress aren't, if there are assets there that the taxpayers can use to, to build the hospitals, the roads, the schools, and all the things that we need, then we'll do it.
Can I ask, or can I say, that what you're trying to sell here this afternoon is something...
Sorry, Ange, I'd be surprised if you weren't cynical about it.
I attended the Regional Action Plan Forum in Ballina, and that was a complete political whitewash, where the Regional Action Plan Forum in Ballina a few weeks ago, Mr George was there, so was Don Page. This is to do with your regional action plans, Barrier Fowler's regional action plans. If you read the document, it turns New South Wales into a mining state. It's here to represent mining interests where all public infrastructure is going to the mining industry to subsidise the mining.
I mean, we agree. There's no argument. People always think every issue is argued between the governments. No, quite often. In fact, I regularly have discussions trying to sort out all these sort of issues. In the 8.5 months that we've been working on this, the federal government, Julia Gillard's government, the Labor government, decided that they would also want to get involved. They've already appointed a scientific committee to start having input to the sorts of processes that we're doing. And in fact, I think this area is one of the highest priorities for that scientific committee. So they're really doing all they can on all those issues. I think, anyway, so there is science and there is all the necessary protections going in.
Right.
There has been a number of wells drilled in our area. One is at Howard's Grass, which is about 2 kilometres from the Wilson's River source, which supplies water to the whole of this area. There's been no notification, no protection, nothing because of that well. Rouse Water, the authority, the county council that's responsible for our water, didn't even know its existence. There are other wells threatened in that area, so we are all at risk. It's not about farmers, it's about all of us, and it's about our water.
In some cases, what they've explained to us is that an exploration licence can be literally for thousands of square kilometres, and if they can't actually do some sort of investigative bores, then they can't actually tell what parts may or may not have risks attached. The clear instruction from day one was absolutely everything is to be available on the website, transparent, honest, open.
So I'd like to know what they did sell for. What did PL 445 sell for? You don't know? How can I find out that information?
What?
That wasn't my only question though.
Which is 445? Some of them were given away for nothing.
I have to pay my mortgage. My farm gets devalued. There are so many other questions apart from just the property rights.
The answer that's been given to me is that we need to distinguish between what happens in Queensland and what happens in New South Wales. As late as this morning, just before I left Sydney, if you don't actually agree, hang on, under the former system, there was an exploration licence which led to the expectation that a development application would receive automatic approval.
Correct. The precautionary principle says that in the absence of evidence to the contrary, you mustn't take the development forwards, because if you take it forwards, you may actually be harming not only this generation, but the next generation and generations to come.
My first degree was in environmental science. Precautionary principle is something I've adhered to in not just in science, but broadly. And I think that there's nobody that I've heard inside our government that would differ with you on that. As to, I think you're misunderstanding the issue around the ELs. The existing ELs, the ones that are out there now, that were given away, as I said, like Carl said before, like confetti, before that goes to the DA, if they are in strategic agricultural land, which is what we're identifying now through the mapping process, they will actually be subject to this new scientific test. In fact, I think this area is one of the highest priorities for that scientific committee. Sledge. That's the perfect name for what might happen to me here today. No, sorry.
About the gateways policy, which you have just recently announced, because it seems that it kicks in after the exploration license phase, when there's already been some wells dug.
They tell me that with the exploration license stage, in order for them to be able to determine what aquifers need protecting, what areas need protecting, and what resources are there, they have to have some rights to do that through the EL stage. It's tricky, it's very tricky, because the old contrary argument is that you run the risk of actually doing some damage up front.
The gateway process is exactly that. It's a gateway, it can be driven through. It doesn't actually protect those areas. And what you promised before you came into government, that there would be areas that were no-go for mining, and your government has completely reneged on that promise.
Maybe I need to remind you again that there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't know whether you were all making this sort of animated opposition when the Labor Party were there, but I can assure you there was nothing 12 months ago. We are the government who is actually trying to put this in place, and what I'm asking for is your support in giving us the guidance on that, not just simply saying no. Well, let me tell you, that doesn't hold one iota, not one iota.
Will the government uphold our exercise of democracy, or will they continue to represent the minority interests of foreign mining corporations?
Yes.